Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Michelle and today we're going to talk about A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a new novel by Suzanne Collins, the author of the Hunger Games Trilogy herself, has come back with a prequel to the trilogy which takes place, I'm not even kidding, 65 years in the past, with one of the main antagonists from the trilogy, President Snow, as the main character. Now this premise may immediately put you off, and I totally get that. I get not wanting to read about President Snow, but in this video, I'm going to talk about the pros of this book, what I really enjoyed about this book, and, maybe give you some more food for thought as to whether or not you actually want to try out this book. One of my favorite booktubers, Murphy Napier, she made a review of this book.
It wasn't a very interesting or gripping origin story. It also wasn't a very compelling origin story. I just didn't feel like I got much out of this book.
Overall, her feedback of that novel was overwhelmingly negative, and I considered, should I even read it? I was like, oh, she hates it, and she and I have very similar tastes, so definitely I'm gonna hate it as well. How could I possibly like a book that she doesn't like? Well, guys, I like a book that Murphy Napier doesn't like, and that's okay. We have a difference of opinion. So let's talk about this book and some reasons why you might or may not want to pick it up. Start first by saying, before we get into it, clearly I am biased. I already had a predisposition to want to love this book. I had a desire to love this book before I ever picked it up. So I am a huge fan of dystopian sci-fi. I really love the Hunger Games trilogy because it hits everything that I love about dystopian sci-fi, specifically making a world that feels realistic and it feels like it could actually get to that point. So that was one of the things that originally drew me to the Hunger Games trilogy. And so I really wanted this prequel because I wanted to know more about how it came to be, how we got to the point of the 75th Hunger Games, the Quarter Quell, where they are bringing back tributes in. How did it get to this point? How did it become such a televised event? How did it become to where these capital people felt so much better than the rest of the world? What happened? How did this happen? This book gives you the answers. This book answers those questions so well. It gives you so much insight as to what the Capitol is like, how the Capitol kind of morphed from just normal everyday people to these ostentatious outfits that they're wearing, these over-the-top big wigs and crazy colored clothes and big white teeth and overly televised events. How did it get to this point? This book gives a lot of insight as to why that is. That ultimately is what drew me to the book and was the main reason I wanted to read the book. And to be frank, it answered the questions that I wanted to hear. It did. It gave me all the information that I was hoping to get from this book and then some. There are people that say that it didn't add anything to the story, but I highly disagree. Here are the things that you're gonna learn through this story that you would not know without this story. First and foremost, how did we go from a war between all the districts in the capital where people were dying, people were getting bombed, people were just in this chaotic war? How did we go from this chaotic, terrible, awful war to Hunger Games? You get to find out. The way that they present it through this story, you can understand why the decision was made to start the Hunger Games, and you can see what the goal originally was with the Hunger Games. And you do have to question, is this actually a better decision? Is this actually a better choice? There is moral complication there, and that kind of thought and that kind of decision is great. Now, you don't get to see the people who made it, right? You don't get to see how the Hunger Games starts. This is 10 years into it. But what you do get is an understanding of why and how it got to the point that it got. And Nothing is more satisfying for me than that kind of world building, because I already knew that the Hunger Games made sense. I knew that it made sense that we could get from where we're at today to this weird split where everyone is sectioned off. But this book adds so much more dimension and perspective to how it got there. It actually makes it more realistic, in my opinion. It grounds it into reality further and makes this a more realistic world to engage in. And that is a wonderful feat as an author. And hats off to you, Suzanne Collins. Bravo. The world building, mwah. We also get to know, as I kind of alluded to earlier, where the mutants came from, how the mutants started to come into place. That was definitely shocking and appalling. And some of the scenes that you get, it is just so mind-boggling how somebody could actually do these kinds of experiments. I think it makes 100% sense when you look at why the Hunger Games started and who started the Hunger Games. And once you get that perspective and you see how those mutants are made, it makes sense that they're making mutants and these kinds of technologies. It makes sense how they got all the technology that's in the 74th Hunger Games. I mean, we're talking 64 years of technological advancement, and what would they actually focus their technological advancement on? They don't have a whole lot of resources. They're limited to what's available in the sectors, and so they're going to improve technologies that improve their mode of being and their way of life, and it makes 100% sense after reading this book why a lot of the technologies that are in the 74th Hunger Games exist. We also get a little insight as to how certain elements of the Hunger Games came to be. So for example, the mentors. Why are there mentors? When did that start? Well, we get that answer. Ranking. Why are there even rankings to begin with? Well, this explains exactly how that got started. This explains exactly why there are rankings and why there are people betting and why there are sponsors. All of it makes sense. And why it's this huge televised event. All of those questions are answered in this story. Again, thank you, Suzanne Collins, because I had these questions and you have answered them and I feel fulfilled. I feel like I can go out of this world in peace knowing exactly that the Hunger Games could totally happen and that this world could turn into the world of the Hunger Games of Pan Am. And yeah, it's a little frightening. Thanks for that. Appreciate the little existential crisis you've put me into, Suzanne Collins. I don't know why you would do this to me, but thank you. It's painful, but I appreciate it. It's got me thinking a lot, and any book that can make me think a lot about the state of the world, how the world could end up, that is a phenomenal thing to me. Again, I am really into dystopian sci-fi, so I love books that help show you how what we live in today could turn into something worse and something crazier, and, maybe potentially how we could avoid it if it's avoidable. These are the kinds of questions that I love asking, and this story asks those questions, and this story proposes potential answers to those questions. One of the things that it gives in this book that I wasn't expecting was some insight into Snow and how he got to this point. I mean, obviously you knew that there was going to be insight into Snow's character and his mind, but I didn't know to what degree, and I was blown out of the water by the degree in which we get perspective. So one of the first things to take note of is Snow is 17 in the course of this book. This book only takes course over like a few months. He is 17 years old. He is young enough himself to be in the Hunger Games. And this is the 10th annual Hunger Games, which means it is a brand new baby thing. In this book, you get the exact age and you get the exact year of the Hunger Games, and it lets you know exactly how much time has passed. 65 years passed from the time of this book to the time that we meet Katniss. Well, 64. So that adds a lot of perspective into Snow's character just in the age factor alone. He was a 17-year-old bright-eyed, blue-eyed boy, baby boy. And in the Hunger Games trilogy, he is a seasoned old man. He is a man who has had to live through 64 Hunger Games. He Well, actually, he lived through all of them. The perspective that you gain is that he is a man who is getting old. He's seen this many, 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 many times, more times than anyone has. And he is dying. He is at the end of his life, and so perspective is changing. And what you also learn is how there are some parallels between how he was during this first Hunger Games and who he was mentoring for the Hunger Games. And there's a lot of parallels between that character and Katniss Everdeen. They're completely different people. They have nothing alike in their personality, but there are parallels in the story itself. There are parallels in the way that things played out. And I think that Suzanne Collins did that on purpose to help you understand why Snow was making the decisions that he was and why Snow was the way that he was. I think that this book helps contextualize that laugh at the end of the third book in the trilogy. There are some really interesting things that the characters do for Cornelius Snow in this story. You have three main characters who impact Snow and change his view. So Snow is already, you can tell at the beginning of the book, he's definitely he's a little bit of a sociopath. You can tell that he is driven by this will to succeed and this will to be powerful and this will to be the best. But there are three characters who really change him a lot and make him go through a lot of character growth, for better and for worse. First and foremost is Sejanus Plinth. Sejanus is this very morally convicted young man. He stands up for what he believes. He is very forthcoming about his opinion, and he does not like the Hunger Games. Sejanus's willpower and strength of moral conviction has a ginormous effect on Coriolanus. It really changes how he behaves throughout the story, and some of the decisions that he makes are heavily impacted by his quasi-friend acquaintance, Sejanus. Another person who changes him a lot is, of course, Lucy Gray Baird. She is a very performative person. When she feels upset, she uses performance to express her emotions, to get attention, and to kind of change the narrative. She is good at changing her own narrative by owning what happens to her and performing the crap out of it. She's a free spirit, and Coriolanus picks up on that, and that really affects him. And the attention that they are able to give each other, and what he sees in her is the ability to succeed, but his opinion of her changes over time and morphs him and makes him make decisions that you're just dumbfounded by. He makes decisions that are just so outside of his character because of Lucy, and it is a beautiful thing to behold. Finally, the character who I think has the greatest negative impact on Coriolanus is Dr. Gall. Dr. Gall is the definition of a sociopath. She has no remorse. She does not care at all who she hurts. All she cares about is this ultimate goal. I love to hate her, and I love to get to know her. I almost wish we saw more of her because she has so much intrigue, and her ability to make Coriolanus think and to change his perspective by making him change his perspective. She doesn't tell him what to think. She doesn't tell him how to feel. She asks him questions, and she recognizes when he is onto something, and she pushes him to go deeper into his sociopathic tendencies. She literally nudges him along the way in the way of sociopathy. That dynamic is so fascinating. I love it so much. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's the best part of the book is him and Dr. Gall. I love that dynamic. I love the power differential. I love the sneaky things that they do to each other. She never misses a beat. He sometimes misses a beat, and it's so wonderful. Their relationship is great. I mean, if you want to read it just for two sociopaths playing mind games with each other, this is a great story for that. So those three characters continually cause this kind of debate and change and thought process in Coriolanus that he wouldn't have without them. And it makes the story so impactful. I was definitely distraught reading this story. It gave me similar feelings that the Hunger Games trilogy gave me. It made me think about society in a very similar way. My God, do I love it? It's not my favorite book that I've read, but I think it's a really, really good book. And I think if you are interested in sci-fi world building and dystopian sci-fi specifically, and you are interested in understanding the thought processes of a sociopath and what they really think about themselves, I think the thing is, Snow lies to himself constantly throughout this book. He doesn't know what he truly values. He doesn't know what he thinks is right and wrong. And sometimes he does, but he'll act against that in lieu of what is the logical and sensical decision to make. And I think that that's really interesting to consume and really interesting to empathize with, because he wasn't a complete sociopath in the beginning. He morphed into more of a sociopath. And so you can see how it happens and the steps that it takes and the little things that need to fall into place to make something like this happen. I think the character style, the kind of sociopathy in the Prince of Thorns trilogy and the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is very similar. So if you like Prince of Thorns, you'll probably like this book. And if you didn't like Prince of Thorns, you probably won't like this book. So do with that as you may. It has a weird pacing. Suzanne Collins has definitely improved since the first Hunger Games, but the pacing itself is kind of all over the place. It seems like it's two separate books kind of meshed into one. I understand why she took the time that she did, but I wish that it had moved maybe a little bit quicker, or maybe that there was a little bit more that happened. Again, it was over 3 months and it felt like pretty long. I mean, I consumed the book pretty quickly, but it still felt like a lot to go through. And there were times when the book really dragged, especially in part 2, when Snow goes to District 12. It's pretty slow moving, and that is something that if you need a super active plot with a lot of stuff going on, you might not fully get this from like the third quarter of the book. So from like halfway to 3/4 of the way, there's not much that happens, at least as much as I would like to see. So it does have a little bit of a lull. Prepare yourself for that if you're looking into reading this book. But what did you think of this book? Are you going to read this book now after what I've said, or are you now even less interested in reading it? I personally loved it, but I have a predisposition to these kinds of stories to begin with. I love reading about the bad guys, I love reading about sociopaths, and I love reading dystopian sci-fi. So this just hit all the check boxes of the kinds of stories I want to read, and therefore I really enjoyed it. But what did you think about the book? Do you like it? Are you going to read it now? Do you even want to read it now? And, thanks so much for watching. I don't normally do videos like this, but I might do more if you hit that like button and subscribe because of this video, if you encourage me to do it. If not, I might do less of them. I might do them occasionally. I just felt very passionate about this story in particular, and especially the negative reviews that it's been getting. So I wanted to share with you a little bit of my view on this story so you can hopefully make a decision as to whether or not you want to read it. And if you do read it, I'd love to talk to you about it. Please, 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 please talk to me about it. If you read this book and you liked it, please. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you want to support me and my channel, go ahead and check out my Patreon, like and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. And I just hope that you have a beautiful, amazing, fantastic day. Bye.